So we're inducting the BBC. So let's just be clear. I just want everyone to know that we're inducting the BBC, and please put that in the comments below. Do we induct the BBC into the Class C, Class B, Class A, or Scholar? But I'll tell you why specifically we're inducting the BBC. So let's just take you up to speed. So this was the tweet that Gary Lineker, who hosts Match of the Day, put out. This was his tweet. There is no huge influx. Talking about England's immigration. We take far fewer refugees than other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. And I'm out of order. So that was his view there. And then the headline was, oh my gosh, are you comparing him to, that German party and so forth back in the 30s? And then he was forced to apologize, take down the whole thing. And Lineker was like, no, that's my view. And here's the thing here. I may not really agree with him. I may agree with what he's saying to an extent, but at the same extent, I'll be like, okay, maybe that's too extreme comparing it there. But my viewpoint doesn't matter. That's his viewpoint. That's what he believes. And if the BBC is an establishment that promotes free speech, forget free speech. If you are now presenting yourself as an institution that doesn't allow its employees to critique, keyword critique, its government, that's a problem. In a democracy, and we'll get there, in a democracy, we should have the freedom to critique the government. We should have the freedom to lampoon, mock, and make fun of the government. Because if we're not allowed to do that, it's no longer a democracy. Now we're not living in a dictatorship and so forth, But I've always said this. England presents itself as a democracy, but the powers that be really don't view it as a democracy. It's just that they want to project it as a democracy to the world, but really it has a lot of vague, broad similarities to somewhat of a dictatorship and even a monarchy. This is where the BBC needs to be inducted. Remember back in the World Cup? So I'm watching the World Cup, I'm like, oh my gosh, World Cup, I wait for this every 4 years. And what I like about the World Cup is the opening ceremony. I love the opening ceremony, specifically, how will a different country show their culture and so forth with the opening ceremony. So there, here I am, BBC. And I'm like, I'm sure the opening ceremony is now. Why am I viewing a documentary about how Qatar messed up the workers and how horrible Qatar is? I was now going to another stream and watch the opening ceremony that was actually really damn good. So the BBC showed themselves to be this virtuous people that took it upon themselves. Even if Qatar paid for your accommodation, got you and allowed you access to view this event that they are holding, but you take it upon yourself not to actually show the opening ceremony of said host country. Because we thought, we have to show ourselves to be on the right side of history and do the right thing. Okay. I thought that was trash. I thought that was stupid, but it is what it is. Now here is the hypocrisy. We fast forward now to where one of your employees is critiquing the government. A lot of people, if you're in England, people despise the Tory government. They despise them. These guys are the bricks. These guys may have helped build the brick academy. These Tories, but fine. Everybody has their political point of view. So now you now take that you take the choice to not show the opening ceremony of Qatar based on how you feel about Qatar, but one of your employees cannot critique your government. And the moment they critique the government, you force them to apologize, to take back that language and so forth. Because you see, it's because if you just look at the headlines that they put out, they try to frame what he said in something very different. Because they try to say, oh, are you comparing the government to that German party that started the World War? No. This is the tweet here. This is the tweet. Not dissimilar. He didn't say they're exactly like that party. He didn't say, although they are trying to form a world war, in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. But then whether you agree or disagree, that's his viewpoint. That is how he's going over to critique said government. So what we now have is something that I just think is beautiful. I just think this is beautiful. So match of the day, that is the main review show of Premier League games. It is probably the most watched show in England, you know, because football is religion in England, and Match of the Day might actually be the most watched show in all of England. It is the show that everyone watches because that is where all the Premier League matches are shown, and everyone watches it for the punditry. So Lineker obviously was said was not going to host the Match of the Day show. Then Ian Wright, who he works with, says, "I'm stepping back in solidarity." Alan Shearer then said, "I'm stepping back in solidarity." So now they lost their three main pundits. Then other guys who still work for the BBC, but said that, okay, I'm not on duty, but even if I was called, I'd say no. Mick Richards said no. Alex Scott said no. Jim Engineer said no. Everyone that's worked for them before, they said no, I wouldn't do it in solidarity of Lineker. So the BBC said, oh, wow, we'll just show highlights. But if you show highlights, I mean, at least who cares about the pundits? They won't really hear from the players. Now the Premier League are saying that no player will give post-match interviews. This is a humongous £4 BBC. Like, this has made the BBC look so stupid. Because Lineker could have very easily been like, it's a lot of money I'm on. Okay, I'm sorry, I take it back, boom. But the fact that Lineker doubled down, didn't take it back, and now we've seen, because Lineker could have very easily been like, I'm not going to double down, and Wright would be like, okay, I'll take his space. Sure, I'll take his space. Or someone else would have taken his space and now become the host and taken his job. But the fact that everybody was like, no. Because you have to read the room. Anybody that takes Lineker's role, you'd look like a fool. Because once you read the room, you have to say, okay, this is where the tide is turning. This isn't the time to now sort of now jump in and leap and take Lineker's host spot. But the fact that you have the Premier League all coming together and saying, nope, we're not going to give you any post-match interviews. We're not going to give you any interviews or whatsoever. And I think even the commentators are saying, no, we're not going to ride with the BBC. I cannot remember a time where the BBC got this lubricated. This is a test tube tubing. This might be a reconstruction by of the BBC by just the people, you know. Because for the BBC, you're being extremely hypocritical. So on one hand, you don't show the opening ceremony of Qatar, and you give us this long documentary about how horrible Qatar is, even though you're there to present the World Cup. Because once you enter into Qatar, you have a job to present the World Cup. But on the other hand, your employee cannot critique your government. Because BBC, what are you saying? So somebody cannot, whether you agree or disagree with him, forget that. He is critiquing the government because everybody has a political view, and obviously Lineker's political views do not mesh with their political views, and he's giving his take of the government. Because BBC, what are you saying? Are you saying now that working for the BBC is the same as working for the government? And by working for the government, you have to be hop and step with everything that the government says, and you are not allowed to say anything against the government. Is that because if you're saying that, then we're now living in like a state-sponsored kind of an institution. Because if BBC, if that's the case, don't you dare point your fingers at a Qatar, a Saudi Arabia, or so forth, because you're pretty much the same. You're pretty much saying that, like, no, as BBC, you cannot say anything against the establishment. You're not allowed to critique the establishment. But when you just look at the response from the people and how everybody has been against the BBC in this, specifically the Premier League. I mean, for me, the big one for me, because the reason why I did this video, because I was going to do this video before, but I'm so glad I waited, because I just read that, when I read that the Premier League players were saying we're not going to give these bums any interviews, I was like, ooh, that's a dub. That's a dub. That is a Dubinsky. That is a freaking Dubinsky, man. But yeah, I mean, guys, tell me below, where should we induct BBC into? Because the hypocrisy of these bum-ass clowns is laughable. And guys, which is why YouTube is so important. YouTube is so us, AFTV, Football Terrace, Goldbridge, Expressions, all these guys. We are so important because we are the new school. Because BBC, you no longer own football punditry. You no longer own for footballing content. All you have is, okay, you can show the footage and so forth. But then again, the youth are rising. And the youth are like, we're not watching that bum-ass BBC, which we now know is owned and paid for by the government. We're watching guys who are individual, who rants, rants, baby, who can say whatever the hell they want. It's changing, okay? BBC, you're old. You're old. The youth don't care about you. It's all about the youth because the youth are the future. The youth don't care about you old bums who pretty much suck up to the freaking government, man. It's about the new school, yo. Hit the subscribe button there, guys. Hit the subscribe button there, guys, man. Yeah. Peace.